The screaming of the great rift changed its tone on the third day of the month of Secundus. It usually sounded like the wailing of 1 billion damned souls. This time it sounded like laughter. It was not the deep and scary laughter of the Chaos Gods. It was high and wild, and it hurt the ears of the astropaths who listened to the warp. On the bridge of the battleship Divine Right, the Lord Admiral looked at the tactical map. He saw a hole in reality that should not exist. The censor officers reported impossible things. They said the enemy fleet was not destroyed by weapons. They said the enemy fleet had turned into balloons. The Lord Admiral shot the officer for heresy because he thought the man was mad. He walked to the reinforced window and looked out. He saw the truth. A grand cruiser of the Black Legion was drifting in the void. It was not burning. It was bright pink. The metal hull was stretched like soft gum. The giant cannons drooped like dead flowers. There was no fire and no blood. There was only silence and a bright neon color that hurt the eyes. The Inquisition arrived 2 weeks later. The delay was caused by the heavy bureaucracy of the Imperium. Forms had to be signed and stamped before the ships could leave port. Inquisitor Kalen led the landing party to the surface of the Hive world below the fleet. The world was called Orestes Prime. It was a factory world that made treads for tanks. Now it made noise. The streets were paved with gold. It was not real gold. It was fake gold that vanished when touched. The smoke from the factories smelled like cheap perfume. The servitors danced instead of working. Kalen had fought demons for 80 years. He had seen skin turned inside out. He had seen blood rain from the sky. He had never seen a dreadnought wearing a giant yellow suit. The dreadnought was angry. It tried to fire its assault cannon. The cannon shot confetti. The confetti cut through the armor of the stormtroopers like diamond blades. Men fell screaming as colorful paper sliced their armor. Kalen realized the danger immediately. This was not just magic. This was the rewriting of rules. The warp is a place of emotion. It follows the rules of fear and anger. This new power did not follow those rules. It followed the rules of a joke. In the grim darkness of the far future, a joke is a deadly thing. A joke does not care about energy shields or thick armor. If it is funny for the shield to break like glass, then the shield breaks. The Chaos Gods watch from their dark dimension. Khorne, the god of war, roared in fury. His champions were slipping on banana peels that appeared from nowhere. The banana peels were the size of drop pods. A berserker would charge and then fall. When he fell, his axe would hit his own squad. It was a slaughter, but it was the humiliating slaughter. The demons could not fight it. You cannot fight something that turns your sword into a rubber chicken. The infection was spreading. It started with a single mask. It was an ancient wooden mask made of green material. It was found by a tired scribe in the lower levels of the city. The scribe was named Hecaton. He was a nobody. He stamped papers for 18 hours a day. He hated his life. He hated the Imperium. He put the mask on his face because he wanted to hide. He did not know that he was opening a door that could never be closed. The mask bonded to his face. The green light exploded outward. The scribe was gone. The big head was here. The scribes on Terra noted the anomaly 3 months after it began. The delay was due to the paperwork backlog. By the time the High Lords of Terra read the report, an entire subsector was gone. It was not destroyed. It was simply different. The report described planets with smiles carved into their continents. It described nebulas rearranged to spell rude words. The Mechanicus was in a panic. Their machine spirits were confused. A tank engine would start singing instead of rumbling. The tech priests prayed to the machine god, but the logic of the machine was broken. They sent a fleet to investigate. The fleet was led by Magos Varnak. Varnak was cold and logical. He did not believe in jokes. He arrived at Orestes Prime and prepared to exterminate the population. He calculated the firing solution. He pressed the button to fire the cyclonic torpedoes. The torpedoes launched, but they did not hit the planet. They stopped in midair. They turned around. They flew back at the Mechanicus ships, but they did not explode. They just knocked on the hull. A giant sound echoed through the void. Knock, knock. The sensors registered the sound waves. Magos Varnak did not know how to answer. The universe waited for the punchline. The punchline was a shockwave of reality-warping energy that turned the steel of the ships into cheese. The ships collapsed under their own weight. Thousands of crew died in the vacuum. It was a tragedy. But on the planet below, the entity laughed. The laughter rippled through the warp. It reached the realm of Nurgle. The plague gardens began to bloom with flowers. The rot turned into fresh paint. Nurgle screamed. This was the true threat. It was not war. It was absolute unpredictable madness. The arrival of the full Imperial response fleet took 6 standard months. The warp currents were difficult and the navigation was slow. The fleet was massive. It was called Battle Fleet Secundus. It contained 12 battleships and 40 cruisers. There were also hundreds of transport ships carrying millions of Imperial Guard soldiers. The soldiers were from the world of Krieg. They were quiet men who wore gas masks and coats. They did not fear death. They only feared failing their duty. The admiral in charge was named Lord Hestus. He was an old man with a metal eye and a bad temper. He had fought orcs and Eldar for 50 years. He believed in heavy guns and strict discipline. He did not believe in the reports of giant hammers and talking dogs. He thought the previous commanders were incompetent. He planned to bomb the planet of Orestes Prime until the surface was glass. He ordered the fleet to form a high anchor formation. The ships arranged themselves in a perfect grid above the planet. The shadow of the fleet fell upon the world below. On the surface of Orestes Prime, the sky turned dark. The green neon lights of the corrupted city shone brighter in the darkness. The first sign of trouble was the communication network. The Vox officers on the flagship tried to hail the planet to demand surrender. This was standard protocol. The Imperium always offers a chance to surrender before they destroy a world. Usually the enemy screams insults or refuses. This time the Voxcasters emitted a loud sound of a horn. It was a bicycle horn sound but amplified to a deafening volume. The bridge crew covered their ears. The sound was followed by a voice. The voice was fast and manic. It invited the fleet to a party. It promised cake and balloons. Lord Hestus hit his command throne in anger. He ordered the communications cut. He turned to the representative of the Space Marines. The chapter present was the Iron Hands. They were soldiers who replaced their weak flesh with strong metal. They were cold and logical. Their leader was Iron Father Karras. Karras stood 7 feet tall in his Terminator armor. His left arm was a giant power claw. His eyes were red lenses. He looked at the planet with zero emotion. He calculated the threat level. He advised an immediate drop pod assault to secure the capital city Manufactorum. He wanted to recover the machine spirits of the factories. He did not care about the jokes. He only cared about the data. The assault began at 0600 hour ship time. The drop pods launched from the strike cruisers. They looked like rain of fire falling toward the planet. Inside the pods, the Iron Hands prepared their weapons. They chanted the litany of aiming. They checked their ammunition counters. They expected resistance from traitors or demons. They were ready for war. The drop pod slammed into the city square of the capital. The retro thrusters fired to slow the impact. The doors blasted open. The Space Marines charged out with bolters raised. They formed a defensive perimeter. They waited for targets. There were no targets. The city square was empty, but it was not normal. The buildings were curved. The windows looked like eyes. The street lamps were twisted into shapes of animals. The ground was not concrete. It was soft. It felt like a trampoline. The heavy boots of the Terminators sank slightly into the rubbery street. Iron Father Karras scanned the area. His sensors detected movement in the sewers. He ordered a squad to investigate. The squad approached a large manhole cover. The cover rattled. A green smoke seeped out. Suddenly, the cover flew into the air. A creature jumped out. It was a small green man wearing a yellow suit with a polka dot tie. It was the masked entity. But it was not just one. It was in projection. It danced around the Space Marines. The iron hands did not hesitate. They opened fire. The bolter shells were explosive rockets designed to penetrate tank armor. They flew straight at the dancing figure. The figure opened its mouth and swallowed the bullets. It made a gulping sound. Then it burped. The burp released a cloud of smoke that smelled like gunpowder. The Space Marines did not pause. They adjusted their aim and fired again. This time the figure pulled a giant magnet out of its pocket. The magnet was huge. It was the size of a car. The laws of physics said a small man could not hold it. The mask held it easily. The magnet hummed. The metal armor of the Space Marines was pulled forward. The iron hands were strong, but the magnetic force was infinite. They were dragged across the rubber street. They stuck to the magnet in a pile of limbs and metal. The figure laughed and spun the magnet around. He threw the magnet into the sky. The squad of elite soldiers flew into the upper atmosphere. They did not die. They just twinkled like a star in the distance. Iron Father Karras watched this on his tactical display. His logic engine could not process the event. It registered as an error. He assumed the enemy had a gravity weapon. He ordered the remaining forces to switch to plasma weapons. Plasma was superheated gas like a piece of the sun. It melted everything. Karras led the charge himself. He marched toward the city center where the main energy signature was located. The streets began to change as they walked. A wall would suddenly appear in front of them. The wall would have a painting of a tunnel on it. The sensors said it was a solid wall, but a vehicle drove out of the painting. It was a taxi cab driven by a skeleton. The taxi honked and tried to run over the iron hands. Karras smashed the taxi with his power claw. The taxi exploded into springs and gears. There was no biological driver. It was a construct. The logic of this war was deteriorating. Up in orbit, the situation was getting worse for the Imperial Navy. The Admiral tried to coordinate the ground war, but his screens were acting up. The tactical maps were being drawn over by an invisible hand. The hand drew moustaches on the icons of the Imperial ships. It drew target circles on the bridge of the flagship. Lord Hester shouted at his tech priest to fix the cogitators. The tech priest prayed and burned incense. They applied sacred oils to the screens. The oil turned into slime. The slime dripped onto the floor and formed words. The words said, "Boring, boring, boring." The Admiral decided he had enough. He ordered an orbital bombardment. He commanded the lance batteries to fire on the city coordinates. The gunners targeted the area where the Iron Hands were fighting. This was a ruthless decision. It would kill the Space Marines too. But the Admiral believed sacrifice was necessary to stop the infection. The giant laser weapons charged up. They fired beams of pure energy down at the planet. The beams hit the atmosphere. A giant mirror appeared over the city. It was a cloud shaped like a hand holding a mirror. The laser beams hit the mirror and bounced off. The beams shot back up into space. They sliced through the void shield of an escort cruiser. The cruiser was cut in half. The two halves drifted apart. The cut surface was perfectly smooth. Then the two halves turned into two smaller ships. The physics of mass were ignored. The crew on the split ships were screaming, but they were not dying in the vacuum. They were breathing. The vacuum of space had been filled with air, but the air smelled like old cheese. The panic on the fleet was spreading. Mutiny was beginning. The commissars were shooting crew members to maintain order, but their bolt pistols were turning into water guns. On the ground, Iron Father Karras was facing the primary avatar of the mask. The entity stood on top of the governor's palace. The palace was now shaped like a giant bouncy castle. The mask was wearing the uniform of an Imperial general, but with medals the size of dinner plates. Karras activated his teleport Homer. He signaled the Terminators in reserve to teleport directly onto the roof. The air shimmered. 5 Terminators appeared, but they did not appear as soldiers. They appeared as bowling pins. They were still conscious. They were trapped in white ceramic bodies shaped like pins. They could not move their arms. They could only wobble. The mask produced a bowling ball. The ball was black and had a skull on it. The mask rolled a ball. It struck the Terminator pins. The sound of a strike echoed across the city. The Terminators were knocked off the roof. Karras felt a surge of emotion. It was anger. Iron hands repress emotion. They view it as weakness. But this mockery broke his conditioning. He roared and charged the entity. He fired his melter gun at point-blank range. The beam of heat hit the mask's chest. It burned a hole through the chest. Karras could see the sky through the hole. The mask looked down at the hole. He looked sad. He pulled a patch out of his pocket. It was a bicycle tire patch. He slapped it over the hole. The hole was fixed. The mask then pulled out a hammer. It was a squeaky toy hammer. He hit Karras on the head. The blow should have been harmless. Instead, it drove Karras into the ground like a nail. The Iron Father was buried up to his neck in the concrete roof. He could not move his power armor. The servos were locked. The mask leaned down and whispered to him. The voice was not human. It sounded like a cartoon sound effect. It said that the Imperium was too serious. It said they needed to lighten up. Suddenly, a new player entered the battlefield. A rift opened in the sky above the city. It was a jagged tear of red light. Chaos had arrived. The Word-Bearer's traitor legion had been watching the events. They sensed the immense power of the mask. They believed it was a new warp god that could be enslaved. A dark apostle named Malachor descended with his retinue. They rode on discs of fire and demonic engines. Malachor landed on the roof opposite the mask. He carried a cursed Crozius and a book of dark rituals. He began to chant. He spoke words that made the air bleed. He summoned demons of Tzeentch and Khorne to bind the green entity. The demons materialized. They were horrors of shifting flesh and fire. They shrieked and lunged at the mask. The mask looked at the demons. He looked at his imaginary watch. He yawned. His jaw unhinged and hit the floor. He grabbed a demon of Khorne by the horns. He tied the demon into a knot. A literal knot. The bloodletter looked confused. It tried to swing its sword, but its arms were tied together. The mask then looked at the horrors of Tzeentch. These were creatures of magic. The mask pulled a vacuum cleaner out of his pocket. He turned it on. The vacuum sucked up the fire and the magic. Then it sucked up the demons. The bag of the vacuum swelled up. The mask emptied the bag over the edge of the roof. Dust bunnies fell out. The dust bunnies had the faces of the demons. They squeaked in high-pitched voices. Malachor the Dark Apostle stopped chanting. He had never seen this. His rituals relied on the laws of the warp. The warp relies on emotion and symbolism. The mask was using the symbolism of a Saturday morning cartoon. This symbolism was stronger because it was based on absurdity. Absurdity destroys fear. Without fear, chaos has no food. Malachor tried to cast a spell of doom. He threw a bolt of warp lightning. The mask caught the lightning. He shaped it into a balloon animal. It was a dog. The lightning dog barked and ran at Malachor. It bit the Dark Apostle on the leg. Malachor screamed. The bite transferred the infection. Malachor's armor began to change. His dark red spikes turned into candy canes. His ancient runes turned into smiley faces. He looked at his hands. They were turning into oversized plush gloves. He realized with horror that he was not dying. He was becoming a prop. He fled. He jumped back into his portal. But the portal did not lead to the warp. It led to a brick wall painted on the sky. He smashed into the wall and slid down. The iron hands retreated. It was a tactical withdrawal. Karis managed to dig himself out of the roof. He saw that victory was impossible with current parameters. The enemy could rewrite reality faster than they could shoot. The soldiers of Krieg were faring no better. They were marching into the industrial district. The factories were producing pies, millions of pies. The Krieg soldiers were wading through custard. Their gas masks were clogged with cream. They tried to fix bayonets, but the bayonets turned into flowers. The discipline of Krieg is absolute, but even they could not fight a war where bullets were marshmallows. The entire landing force was being humiliated. They were not generating martyrs. They were generating comedy. And the Imperium cannot survive comedy. Lord Hestus on the flagship received the final report from the surface. Casualties were 0. Dignity loss was 100%. The fleet was running low on supplies because the food in the stasis lockers had turned into plastic fruit. The water had turned into soda. The crew was getting hyperactive and jittery. The discipline was breaking down. Hestus realized that if they stayed, they would all become clowns in this circus. He ordered the fleet to pull back to the Mandeville Point. They needed to leave the system. They needed to warn Terra. This was not a rebellion. This was a rewriting of the genre. As the fleet turned to leave, a message appeared on the sensors of every ship. It was written in the stars themselves. The stars moved to form letters. The message said, "Don't go yet." A giant energy wave pulsed from the planet. It hit the engines of the fleet. The plasma drive stalled. The ships drifted. They were trapped. The mask was not letting his audience leave. He needed straight men for his jokes. The Imperium was the ultimate straight man. The quarantine was now a cage. Inquisitor Kalen sat in his quarters on the retreating transport. He was writing his log. He wrote with a quill on parchment. He did not trust the computers anymore. He wrote that the Emperor protects, but he was not sure if the Emperor had a sense of humor. If the Emperor could not laugh, then he could not fight this. Kalen looked at his rosette, the symbol of his office. It was heavy gold. He watched as the gold slowly turned into chocolate. He took a bite. It was good chocolate. He wept. He wept because he knew that the nightmare was that the universe was no longer serious. And in a universe without consequence, there is no heroism. There is only the punchline. And the punchline was coming for them all. The blockade was broken not by force but by farce. The first battle of Orestes Prime was over. The Imperium had lost. The mask had won. And the laughter was getting louder. The trap around the Orestes system was tight. The Imperial fleet could not move. The engines of the great battleships were cold. The crews were scared. They ate the plastic fruit and drank the soda water. They felt sick. But the sickness of the body was nothing compared to the sickness of the mind. They looked out the windows and saw the stars moving. The stars danced. They spelled out insults. The navigators wept in their chambers. They could not see the light of the Astronomicon. They only saw a giant grinning face in the warp. The face winked at them. Lord Hestus sat on his command throne. He was tired. His metal eye clicked. He watched the tactical map. The map was now drawn in crayon. It showed his ships as little ducks in a pond. It was humiliating. He wanted to die fighting. He did not want to die as a toy. Then the laughter stopped. It did not fade away. It was cut off. A silence fell over the system. It was a heavy silence. It felt like a blanket of lead. The astropaths on the ships began to scream. They did not scream in annoyance. They screamed in pure terror. They clawed at their eyes. They yelled one word over and over. They yelled the word hunger. The sensors on the bridge flashed red. They detected a gravity distortion at the edge of the system. It was not a warp rift. It was something physical. It was massive. It was the size of a solar system. It was the shadow in the warp. The Tyranids had arrived. A splinter fleet of Hive Fleet Leviathan had detected the psychic noise of the mask. The mask was loud in the warp. He shone like a lighthouse. The Tyranids are attracted to psychic light. They eat it. They thought Orestes Prime was a feast. They came to consume it. The bioships entered the system from the galactic south. There were thousands of them. They looked like giant squids made of bone and meat. They did not have engines. They swam through the void. They did not care about the jokes. They did not care about the rubber physics. They only cared about biomass. They saw the Imperial fleet. They ignored it. The fleet was made of metal. Metal is not food. They headed straight for the planet. They wanted the green energy. Lord Hestus saw this. He felt a spark of hope. This was standard warfare. He knew how to fight Tyranids. Or better yet, he could let the Tyranids fight the mask. It was a classic strategy. Let the monsters kill each other. Then kill the winner. He ordered the fleet to go to silent running. He told his gunners to hold fire. He wanted to watch. The bioships approached the planet. They released millions of mycetic spores. The spores were drop pods made of flesh. They rained down on the neon city. They darkened the sky. The invasion had begun. On the surface, the mask was busy. He was painting a mural on the side of a mountain. The mural was a picture of himself eating a sandwich. He stopped painting. He looked up. He saw the rain of spores. He adjusted his yellow fedora. He smiled. He thought it was a delivery. He thought it was pizza. He opened his mouth. His jaw stretched wide. It became a giant funnel. He caught the first wave of spores in his mouth. He swallowed them whole. He rubbed his tummy. Then he burped. The burp was green fire. It incinerated the next wave of spores. But there were too many. The Tyranids are endless. The spores hit the ground. They burst open. Gaunts poured out. They were small killer beasts with scything talons. They hissed. They charged the city. They ran on the rubber streets. They did not slip. Tyranids adapt. Their claws dug into the soft ground. They found the citizens who were hiding. The citizens were already changed by the mask. They were wearing clown suits and funny hats. The Tyranids did not care. Meat is meat. The slaughter began. It was brutal. The comedy stopped. The blood was red again. The mask did not like this. He did not like his audience being eaten. It ruined the show. The mask appeared in the middle of the street. He was wearing a lion tamer costume. He held a whip and a chair. He cracked the whip. He told the Gaunts to sit. The Gaunts did not sit. They screeched and leapt at him. The mask dodged. He moved like liquid. He stepped aside and the Gaunts hit the wall. The wall was painted with a tunnel again. This time the Gaunts ran into the painted tunnel. But they did not come out. They were trapped in the painting. The mask laughed. He thought he won. But then the painting rippled. The paint began to bubble. The Tyranids in the painting were eating the paint. They were eating the reality of the trap. A lictor burst out of the wall. It was a stealth organism. It was purple and invisible. It struck the mask. Its talons went through his chest. The mask looked down. He saw the claw sticking out of his yellow suit. He made a sad face. He pulled a giant eraser out of his pocket. He erased the lictor's claws. The lictor looked at its arms. The arms ended in smooth stumps. The beast was confused. The mask then drew flowers on the stumps with a marker. The lictor roared and tried to bite him. The mask put a muzzle on it. The muzzle was made of steel. The Tyranid bit through the steel. This was the problem. Tyranids adapt. They adapt to heat. They adapt to cold. Now they were adapting to Toon physics. The hive mind is a supercomputer. It analyzes every threat. It realized that physical force did not work. It realized that the laws of this prey were flexible. So the hive mind decided to become flexible too. This was the catastrophe. The Tyranids did not die. They changed. The spores in the atmosphere began to absorb the green energy. The new gaunts that were born were different. They did not have chitin armor. They had rubber skin. Their eyes were not cold and alien. Their eyes were big and spinning. They did not hiss. They honked. A Carnifex landed in the city square. A Carnifex is a living tank. Usually, it crushes everything. This Carnifex was bright pink. It had massive crushing claws, but the claws were boxing gloves. It roared. The roar sounded like a train whistle. Ironfather Karras was watching from his defensive position. He saw the pink Carnifex. He saw it charge a building. The building bounced off the Carnifex. The monster was indestructible. It was fueled by the biomass of the Tyranids and the magic of the mask. It was a hybrid. It was a Toon Tyranid. Karras felt a logic error in his brain. This was impossible. The Tyranids were stripping the planet, but they were doing it in a funny way. They were using giant spoons to scoop up the earth. They were using straws to drink the oceans. It was efficient. It was terrifying. The mask saw the pink Carnifex. He fell in love. He thought it was a pet. He ran to it. He hugged its leg. The Carnifex looked down. The hive mind was confused. It usually killed everything, but this prey was hugging it. The hive mind felt a new emotion. It was not hunger. It was amusement. The shadow in the warp changed. It stopped being a void. It started to broadcast music. It was circus music. The psychic scream of the Tyranids became a melody. The astropaths on the fleet started to hum. They could not stop. They hummed the circus theme while they bled from their noses. Lord Hestus realized his mistake. He had not distracted the enemy. He had given the enemy a weapon. The Tyranids were spreading the madness faster than the mask ever could. They were biological carriers. A gargoyle flew up to the flagship. It smashed through the bridge window. The void shields did not stop it because the gargoyle was holding a sign that said, "Guest." The gargoyle landed on the command table. It looked like a bat with a clown nose. It exploded. Did not explode with shrapnel. It exploded with glitter. The glitter got everywhere. It got into the air recyclers. It got into the engines. The ship's machine spirit began to laugh. The engine hum changed pitch. The battleship Divine Right started to wobble. It flapped its solar wings like a bird. Hestus held onto his throne. He screamed an order to abandon ship. But the escape pods were locked. The computer said they were reserved for VIPs. The VIPs were the Tyranids. More gargoyles poured in. They did not kill the crew. They put hats on them. They painted faces on them. The crew tried to fight. But you cannot fight a monster that laughs when you shoot it. A sergeant fired a shotgun at a warrior. The warrior caught the pellets. It juggled them. Then it threw them back. The pellets turned into candy. The sergeant was buried in hard candy. He suffocated. It was a terrible death. On the planet, the mask and the hive tyrant were dancing. The hive tyrant was the leader of the swarm. It was 20 feet tall. It wore a tuxedo made of bone. The mask led it in a tango. They danced across the ruins of the Manufactorum. As they danced, they destroyed the city. Every step crushed the tank. Every spin leveled a building. The Mechanicus forces tried to intervene. Margos Varnak unleashed his battle automata. The giant robots fired their blasters. The hive tyrant deflected the shots with a cane. The cane was made of a spine. The shots hit a fuel refinery. The refinery exploded. The explosion formed the shape of a smiley face. The hive mind was learning fast. It realized that the mask was the source of this power. It decided to consume the mask, not to destroy him, but to add his biological distinctiveness to the swarm. The mask did not know this. He thought they were friends. He was naive. He was a chaotic force, but he was not malicious. The Tyranids are purely malicious. They are hunger incarnate. The hive tyrant finished the dance. It dipped the mask low. Then it opened its chest cavity. Ribs cracked open like a bear trap. Inside was not organs. Inside was a maw of teeth. The hive tyrant bit the mask in half. The green energy did not dissipate. It exploded. It flowed into the Tyranid. The hive tyrant convulsed. Its body shifted. It grew. It turned green. The yellow suit appeared on his carapace. The hive tyrant roared, but the roar was smoking. The voice shook the planet. The Tyranid fleet in orbit changed instantly. The bioships grew giant teeth. They grew eyes that popped out on stalks. They started to chase the Imperial ships, but not to eat them, to play tag. A bioship rammed the cruiser Hammer of Dawn. The cruiser broke apart. The bioship ate the pieces. Then it spat them out. The pieces reassembled into a giant metal duck. The crew inside were alive. They were now the crew of a duck. They screamed. This was the fate of the fleet. They were being reformatted. Lord Hestus watched his armada turn into a toy box. He drew his power sword. He looked at the bridge crew. They were all wearing masks now, not the green mask, but paper masks of Tyranids. They were chanting, "One of us, one of us." Hestus looked at his pistol. He thought about ending it, but the pistol turned into a banana. He peeled it. It was rotten. He threw it away. There was no escape. The Tyranids had absorbed the reality warping power. They were now the Toon-Nids. They were unstoppable. They did not just eat biomass. They ate dignity. They ate physics. They ate hope. The hive mind had a sense of humor now, and its sense of humor was cruel. Deep in the warp, the Chaos Gods watched. They were no longer laughing. Nurgle stopped brewing his plagues. Khorne stopped his battles. Tzeentch stopped his schemes. They saw the threat. A Tyranid hive fleet is dangerous. A Tyranid hive fleet that can rewrite reality is an existential threat to the warp itself. If the Tyranids ate the galaxy and turned it into a cartoon, the Chaos Gods would starve. There is no blood in a cartoon. There is only ink. There is no despair in a cartoon. There is only gags. The gods realized they had to intervene. They could not let the Tyranids leave the system. But the Tyranids were already moving. The bioships fired their engines. The engines were giant rockets strapped to their backs. They left trails of sparkles. They headed for the Mandeville Point. They were going to jump into the warp. They were going to spread the fun to the rest of the Imperium. The mask pulled himself back together on the planet's surface. He was smaller now. He had lost a lot of power to the swarm. He looked at the sky. He saw his friends leaving. He felt sad. He didn't want to be left behind. He grabbed a lamppost. He bent it into a spring. He sat on it. He launched himself into space. He landed on the back of the Hive Tyrant's ship. He rode it like a cowboy. He waved his hat. The system was left in ruins. The planet Orestes Prime was a wasteland of confetti and slime. The population was gone. They were either eaten or turned into living jokes. The Imperial fleet was a collection of toys drifting in the void. This ended with the villains winning. The villains were a combination of the two worst things in the galaxy: infinite hunger and infinite madness. The curtain fell, but the show was moving to a bigger stage. The target was now the Segmentum Solar. The target was terror. The Tyranids wanted to play with the Emperor, and they had the power to get there. The catastrophe was complete. The genre of the universe had shifted. War was over. The Saturday morning apocalypse had begun. The infection of the Orestes system was not contained. The blockade failed. The Tyranid Hive fleet, now twisted by the powers of the mask, moved into the open void. They did not travel like normal ships. Normal ships must push against gravity. They must tear a hole in the warp to travel faster than light. The Toon Tyranids did not do this. They used a new method. The bioships painted a black tunnel on the fabric of space. It looked like a tunnel painted on a rock in a desert. The ships flew into the painting. They vanished from real space. They entered the warp, but they did not enter as prey. They entered as tourists. The warp is the realm of souls and emotions. It is usually a nightmare of storms and demons. The Tyranids changed the weather. The warp storms turned into rain of gumdrops. The screaming faces in the ether turned into singing choirs. The destination of the fleet was the Cathalamor system. This was a key strategic gate. It guarded the route to terror. If Cathalamor fell, then the path to the throne world was open. The system was heavily defended. It had 3 fortress worlds and a major naval dockyard. The Lord High Admiral of the sector was named Drang. Drang was a realist. He read the reports from Orestes. He did not believe them. He thought the captains were drunk or under the influence of hallucinogens. He prepared for a standard Tyranid invasion. He set up firing lines. He mined the asteroid fields. He placed his battleships in the center of the formation. He was confident. He was wrong. The Tyranids arrived on a Tuesday. They did not exit the warp. They unzipped space. A giant zipper appeared in the darkness. An invisible hand pulled it down. The void opened. The biofleet spilled out. They were making noise in the vacuum of space. It was the sound of a slide whistle. The defenders of Cathalamor froze. The sensors reported millions of contacts, but the contacts were not biological. They were registered as confectionery. The asteroid mines detonated. They were nuclear mines meant to shatter rock. The explosions triggered, but there was no fire. The mines released giant boxing gloves on springs. The gloves punched the Tyranid ships. The ships bounced. They did not break. They made a bowing sound. The rubber physics of the mask protected them. Admiral Drang watched from his bridge. His face went pale. He ordered the Nova Cannon to fire. The Nova Cannon is a weapon that shoots a shell close to the speed of light. It causes a nuclear blast the size of a continent. The shell flew true. It hit the leading hive ship. The hive ship opened its mouth. It caught the shell. It chewed. It swallowed. Then the ship's abdomen swelled up. It exploded. But it did not die. It reassembled itself instantly from the pieces. The pieces were held together by band-aids. The ship signaled the Imperial fleet. It flashed a message in Morse code. The message was, "That was spicy." The psychological impact on the Imperial Guard was immediate. The soldiers on the fortress worlds were ready to die for the Emperor. They were ready to face horror. They were not ready to face ridicule. A regiment of Cadian shock troopers held the line on the planet Cathalamor Prime. They saw the sky turn purple. Drop pods landed. The pods were shaped like Easter eggs. They cracked open. Genestealers jumped out. These were apex predators, but they were wearing tutus. They danced towards the trenches. The commissar ordered his men to fix bayonets. He shouted that the Emperor watches. The men charged. They stabbed the genestealers. The bayonets bent. They made a squeaking sound. The genestealers laughed. They tapped the soldiers on the head. The soldiers fell down. When they stood up, they were wearing chicken suits. The infection was instantaneous. It rewrote the genetic code of the victim to make them funny. The loss of Cathalamor Prime took 3 hours. It was the fastest defeat in Imperial history. There were no bodies. There were only cast members. The entire population was converted into background characters for the cartoon reality. The manufactorum started producing pies and seltzer bottles. The cathedrals were repainted with bright primary colors. The statues of saints were given silly moustaches. The insult to the imperial creed was absolute. The psychic shockwave of this mockery hit Terra. The Astronomicon flickered. The Golden Throne is a machine of pure order and pain. It cannot process joy. It cannot process humor. The presence of the Toon-Nids in the warp acted like sand in a pristine engine. The Emperor on his throne did not move. He is a corpse. But the custodian standing guard felt a chill. The temperature in the throne room dropped. A single balloon drifted down from the ceiling. It was red. It popped. The sound was like a thunderclap. The High Lords of Terra met in emergency session. The Fabricator General of Mars was present. His name was Audia Raskian. He was the size of a building. He spoke in binary code. He stated that the logic of the universe was compromised. The laws of physics were being ignored. The Tyranids were violating the Treaty of Reality. He proposed a radical solution. The Imperium could not fight this. They needed a weapon that enforced order. They needed a weapon that killed souls and silenced the warp. They needed the necrons. This was heresy. To ask the Xenos for help is death. But the alternative was to become a cartoon. The High Lords voted. It was unanimous. They would activate the ancient beacons. They would wake the tombs in the Cathalamor sector. They would let the ancient enemy fight the new madness. The Sautek dynasty was sleeping on the dead world of Varvinkra, which was in the same sector. The planet was a barren rock. Deep underground, the Necron overlord, Xandrik, slept in his sarcophagus. The signal from Terra reached the tomb world. It was a coded plea. The tomb woke up. Green lightning arc reactor engines fired. The ground shook. Great pyramids rose from the dust. The Necrons are machines. They have no souls. They have no humor. They are the antithesis of the warp. They are the masters of the physical universe. Overlord Xandrik awoke. He was senile. He thought he was still fighting the wars of flesh and blood from 60 million years ago. He looked at the tactical display. He saw the Tyranids. He did not see monsters. He saw barbarians. He saw disorderly rebels. He ordered his legions to restore order. The Necron fleet launched. It was a crescent of black metal and green light. These ships were older than humanity. They used inertialess drives. They did not use the warp. They simply appeared where they wanted to be. They arrived at Cathalamor just as the Tyranids were preparing to eat the second planet. The contrast was stark. The Tyranids were bright neon pink and green. They were bouncing and singing. The Necrons were silent black stone. They moved in perfect synchronization. The two forces collided. The battle was a clash of genres. The Necrons fired Gauss flares. These weapons strip atoms from molecules. They flay reality layer by layer. The Tyranid warriors were hit. The green beams struck them. Usually, This dissolves the target, but the Toon Tyranids were elastic, their bodies stretched. The beam hit a gaunt. The gaunt stretched like rubber. It became 10 feet long. Then it snapped back. It was unharmed. It looked at the Necron warrior. It stuck out its tongue. The Necron warrior did not react. It fired again. The Necrons are stubborn. They do not get frustrated. They just repeat the process. Overlord Xandric watched from his command barge. He was confused. His royal court tried to explain. His Vargard, Obyron, was a master swordsman. Obyron teleported onto a Tyranid bioship. He swung his war scythe. The blade can cut through anything. He struck a Carnifex. The Carnifex split in two, but the two halves did not die. They turned into two smaller Carnifexes. They looked at Obyron. They applauded. Obyron felt a sensation he had not felt in eons. Annoyance. He cut them again. They multiplied again. It was a Hydra effect. The violence was feeding the comedy. The more serious the Necrons acted, the funnier the Tyranids became. The serious nature of the Necrons made them the perfect foil. The universe was using the Necrons to set up the punchline. The Tyranid hive mind, now fully merged with the mask persona, saw the Necrons as new toys. The Necrons were skeletons. Skeletons are funny. The hive mind directed the swarm to play the xylophone on the Necron ribs. A swarm of gargoyles flew at a monolith. The monolith is a floating tank. The gargoyles did not shoot it. They spray painted it. They painted it to look like a dice. Then a giant bio-titan picked it up and rolled it. The monolith tumbled through space. It crashed into a Necron cruiser. The impact destroyed both ships. The explosion spelled the word Yahtzee in the stars. The Fabricator General on Terra watched the long-range augers. His logic circuits were overheating. The Necrons were failing. The hard logic of the ancient machines could not delete the illogical data of the Toon-Nids. The Necrons tried to use Tesseract labyrinths to trap the beasts. The Tyranids treated the labyrinths like hamster balls. They ran inside them. They generated energy. They used the energy to power giant disco lights. The battle was turning into a rave. The Necrons were being forced to dance. The mind-shackle scarabs were hacked. Instead of controlling minds, they forced the Necron warriors to do the conga. This was the chain reaction. The failure of the Necrons meant that physical laws were no longer valid anywhere in the sector. The madness was spreading to the atomic level. Electrons stopped spinning and started jittering. Gravity stopped pulling down and started pulling sideways. The Imperial Guard regiments on the planets were lost. They were not dead. They were worse. They were cartoons. A general looked at his hand. It was a paw. He looked at his tank. It was a turtle. He tried to scream. He could only say, Ruro. The dignity of the human species was being erased. Chaos watched this and panicked. The Chaos Gods exist because of mortal emotion. If mortals become cartoons, their emotions become shallow. A cartoon character does not feel true despair. They only feel exaggerated sadness. They do not feel true rage. They feel slapstick anger. This starvation would kill the Chaos Gods. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos, took action. He was in the eye of terror. He saw the threat. He gathered the Black Legion. He did not want to conquer terror anymore. He wanted to save the galaxy from being turned into a joke. He launched the Planet Killer. This was a ship built to destroy worlds. Its main weapon could shatter a planet's core. Abaddon brought his fleet to Cathalamor. It was a three-way war. The Imperium and Necrons on one side, the Tyranids on the other. And now Chaos arrived to burn it all. Abaddon targeted the central Tyranid hive ship. He charged the Armageddon gun. The energy built up. It was enough power to crack a continent. He fired. The beam of red energy shot across the void. It hit the hive ship. The hive ship held up a small mirror, a simple hand mirror. The beam hit the mirror. It reflected. It went back to the planet killer. Abaddon saw the beam coming. He screamed. The beam hit his ship. But the mask interferes with consequences. The ship did not explode. It turned into a giant burnt piece of toast. The crew were covered in soot. Their hair was blown back. They blinked in unison. Abaddon looked at his Talon of Horus, the legendary claw that killed a Primarch. It was holding a bouquet of wilted flowers. He fell to his knees. He realized the truth. You cannot kill a joke with a gun. You can only kill a joke with silence, or with a bad audience. But the galaxy was a great audience. The galaxy was full of misery, and the mask was the relief. The Tyranids were feeding on the relief. They were unstoppable. The Necron's silent king, Zarek, observed from the dark space between galaxies. He saw the failure of the Saltec dynasty. He saw the humiliation of Abaddon. He understood what the Imperium did not. This was not a war of weapons. It was a war of narratives. The Tyranids were writing a comedy. To beat them, you had to change the genre. You had to make it a tragedy so deep that no laughter could survive. Or you had to make it a documentary so boring that the joke died. The Silent King possessed the celestial orrery, a map of the galaxy where every star was a spark of light. If he snuffed out a light, the real star would go supernova. He could destroy the Gathalamor system instantly. He could burn the Tyranids, the Imperium, and the Necrons there. It would be a surgical amputation. But there was a risk. The Toon-Nids were infected with warp magic. If he destroyed the star, the energy might not kill them. It might just give them a bigger special effect. An explosion is just a backdrop for a hero shot. The Silent King hesitated. This hesitation was the breach. The Tyranids sensed the orrery. They sensed the shiny lights. They wanted the shiny lights. A splinter fleet broke off. They did not head for Terra. They headed for the Necron homeworld. They wanted to play with the galaxy map. They wanted to rearrange the stars to make a smiley face in the sky. On the surface of Gathalamor Prime, the original mask entity sat on a pile of rubble. He was tired. The Tyranids were doing all the work. He felt like his act was being stolen. He watched a Carnifex slip on a banana peel. It was funny the first time. It was not funny the millionth time. The mask realized something. He was a chaotic spirit of mischief, but the Tyranids were a hive mind of consumption. They were consuming the concept of mischief. They were mass-producing it, and mass-produced comedy is soul-crushing. The mask frowned. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the wooden mask. He tried to take it off. He pulled. It stuck. His face stretched. He could not remove it. He was bonded to the swarm. The swarm was him. He was the swarm. He was trapped in his own joke. The human element was fading. Trooper Jenkins of the 412th Cadian was hiding in a crater. He was writing a letter to his mother. The ink was invisible. The paper was edible. He tried to remember what his mother looked like. He could only picture a stick figure. He cried. His tears were bubbles. This was the horror. It was not pain. It was the loss of self. The loss of the ability to be sad. The universe was forcing him to be happy. Forced happiness is the cruelest torture. Jenkins stood up. He walked towards the Tyranids. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted to be real. A Tyranid warrior saw him. It handed him a balloon. Jenkins took it. He floated away. He became part of the sky. The complete collapse of the Gathalamor front. The road to Terra was wide open. The Necrons were dancing. Chaos was a burnt toast. The Imperium was a cartoon. The Tyranids were surfing on solar winds towards the Sol system. The only thing standing between humanity and total absurdity was the Sol system defenses. the custodes, the Grey Knights, and the Emperor himself. But what can a corpse do against a whoopee cushion? The strategic situation was terminal. The narrative was broken. The only hope lay in a choice that had to be made by the one person who understood the mask best, the man who found it, the scribe Hecaton. But Hecaton was gone. Or was he? Deep inside the hive mind, deep inside the green energy, the soul of the scribe was screaming. He was the small choice that remained. He was the only thread of tragedy left in the tapestry of farce. The galaxy laughing itself to death. The defense of the Sol system is the most prepared strategic operation in human history. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has fortified the cradle of humanity against every possible threat. There are minefields that span millions of miles. There are star forts with firepower to break moons. There are the Grey Knights on Titan and the Custodes on Terra. The High Lords believe this wall of iron is unbreakable, but they prepared for war. They did not prepare for a carnival. The Tyranids entered the system not by breaching the Mandeville points, but by painting a door on the fabric of the universe near Pluto. The door opened and the fleet poured out. The planet of Pluto was the first casualty. It was not destroyed. The Hive fleet surrounded it. They put a giant pair of sunglasses on the planet. Then they spun it on its axis until it was a blur. The orbital stations were not fired upon. They were wrapped in giant ribbons and given as gifts to the smaller bioships. The psychological impact on the defenders of Sol was catastrophic. The crews of the Battle Fleet Solar are the elite of the elite. They are trained to face hell. They looked at their sensors and saw the enemy approaching in a conga line. The discipline broke. Captains tried to give orders to fire, but their voices changed. The Voxcasters applied a filter that made everyone sound like they had inhaled helium. The Lord High Admiral attempted to authorize the release of cyclonic torpedoes. His command key turned into a rubber duck. He squeezed it. It squeaked. The torpedoes did not launch. Instead, the ship released a giant banner that said, "Bang." The reality of the Sol system was being overwritten by the narrative force of the mask. The mask operates on the rule of funny. It is funny for the most serious military in the galaxy to be helpless. Therefore, they were helpless. On the moon of Titan, the Grey Knights prepared their rituals. They are the demon hunters. They know the names of the dark gods. Grandmaster Voldus stood on the walls of the fortress monastery. He gathered the librarians. They joined their minds to cast a psychic banishment. They targeted the hive mind. They tried to sever the connection between the Tyranids and the warp. The psychic beam lashed out. It struck the lead hive ship. The hive ship was wearing a top hat. The ship tipped its hat. The psychic energy was reflected back. It hit Titan. The fortress monastery did not explode. It turned into a bouncy castle. The Grey Knights in their Terminator armor tried to walk, but the floor was made of air-filled vinyl. They bounced. They fell. They could not stand. The most serious warriors of the Emperor were reduced to children jumping in a playground. Voldus felt a deep shame. The shame was the weapon. The mask feeds on the embarrassment of the victim. The only force that remained effective was the Adeptus Custodes. The bodyguards of the Emperor are not like other men. They do not feel shame. They do not feel fear. They have no humor. They are absolute perfection. Captain-General Trajann Valoris stood on the walls of the Imperial Palace. He watched the sky turn from black to polka dot. He did not blink. He analyzed the threat. He realized that the enemy was reacting to emotion. The Imperial Navy was failing because they were scared and angry. The Grey Knights failed because they were mystical and serious. The enemy was using their own nature against them. To defeat this enemy, one must be nothing. One must be a void. Valoris ordered the deployment of the Silent Sisterhood. The Sisters of Silence are blanks. They have no souls. They have no presence in the warp. They are the anathema to all psychic magic. If the mask was a warp entity, then the sisters should be able to hurt it. Knight Commander Janisha Kroll led the strike force. They boarded a stealth assault ship. The ship was coated in psi-dampening material. They flew towards the center of the Tyranid fleet. The Tyranids did not see them. The mask did not see them. To the mask, a Sister of Silence is a plot hole. She is a boring part of the story that cannot be rewritten. The stealth ship slipped past the dancing bioships. It dodged the giant floating pies. It landed on the hull of the flagship. The flagship was a biological nightmare disguised as a funhouse. The walls were made of flesh but painted with bright colors. The floor was a tongue. The doors were teeth. Valoris and Kroll led the boarding party. They cut through the hull. They entered the ship. Inside, the laws of physics were broken. Gravity was sideways. Rain fell from the floor. But around the Sisters of Silence, the madness stabilized. The presence of the blanks forced reality to be real. The colorful paint melted away to reveal rotting meat. The funny sounds turned into screeching. The Toon-Nids that approached them lost their cartoon powers. A gaunt that was juggling grenades suddenly realized it was holding live explosives. The grenades detonated. The gaunt died. The sisters were a bubble of sanity in an ocean of madness. They pushed towards the bridge. They were looking for the brain. The hive tyrant that had eaten the mask. They found it in the central chamber. The chamber was designed to look like a stage. There were curtains made of skin. There was a spotlight made of bioluminescence. The hive tyrant stood in the center. It was wearing the yellow suit. It was holding a microphone. It was telling jokes to a crowd of hormagaunts. The jokes were terrible. They were puns about eating biomass. The gaunts laughed. The laughter was a psychic scream. Valoris charged. He moved faster than the human eye can follow. He swung his watcher's axe. The hive tyrant saw him. It tried to use a prop. It pulled a bouquet of flowers out of its pocket. It tried to spray acid from the flowers. But Valoris was standing next to Kroll. The blank aura nullified the warp magic. The flowers remained flowers. The acid did not manifest. The hive tyrant looked confused. It looked at the camera that wasn't there. It gulped. Valoris struck. The axe cut deep into the tyrant's chitin. Green blood sprayed out. The tyrant roared. It dropped the microphone. It reverted to its feral nature. It lashed out with bone swords. The fight was brutal. Valoris was the greatest warrior of the Imperium. But the hive tyrant was fueled by the biomass of 1,000 worlds and the infinite energy of the mask. It healed instantly. Valoris cut off an arm. The arm grew back. The tyrant hit Valoris. The impact cracked the auramite armor. Valoris flew back. The Sisters of Silence fired their bolters. The explosive rounds hit the tyrant. They blew chunks of meat off its body. But the tyrant laughed. It was starting to adapt to the blank aura. The mask was learning. It realized that if it couldn't change the sisters, it could change the environment around them. The floor turned into ice. The sisters slipped. The ceiling turned into anvils. The anvils fell. The sisters were crushed. They were not dead, but they were trapped under heavy iron. Only Valoris remained standing. He was alone. The blank field was weakened. The madness began to creep back in. The hive tyrant grew larger. It towered over him. It prepared the final blow. It wound up a giant punch. Its fist grew to the size of a tank. This was the end. The physical might of the custodes was not enough. But Valoris had brought something else. He had not just brought warriors. He had brought a prisoner. Strapped to the back of a shield bearer was a stasis cask. Valoris activated the release. The cask opened. Inside was a man. He was small. He was thin. He wore the robes of a low-level scribe. He was asleep. This was not a warrior. This was a clone. The Mechanicus on Mars had done something forbidden. They had used the genetic material left on the original mask-finding site to grow a replica of the host. This was a clone of Hecaton. It had no mind. It was a husk, but it had a soul signature. Valoris gambled on a theory. The mask entity bonds to a host. It bonded to Hecaton. It thinks Hecaton is still inside. Valoris kicked the clone towards the Hive Tyrant. The Hive Tyrant stopped. It looked at the small human. The mask entity recognized the face. It paused. The comedy stopped. The music died. In that moment of silence, a psychic bridge opened. The clone was a vessel. The real soul of Hecaton was trapped deep inside the hive mind. He saw his own face. He saw a way out. The consciousness of the scribe surged. He was currently buried under layers of alien hunger and chaotic joy. He was living in a dream where he was a king. He had everything he ever wanted. He had power. He had revenge on the bosses who bullied him. He had no paperwork. But Hecaton looked at Valoris. He saw the golden giant bleeding. He saw the grim determination. He saw the absolute lack of humor. And he remembered. He remembered that he was a man. He remembered that life is not supposed to be a cartoon. Life is supposed to be hard. Life is supposed to have consequences. If you fall off a cliff, you should die. You shouldn't make a hole in the ground shaped like your body. The scribe felt a sudden wave of revulsion. He hated the fun. He hated the laughter. He wanted to be miserable again. He wanted to be human. This was the small choice. Hecaton rejected the paradise. He rejected the godhood. He chose to be a clerk. He reached out from inside the hive mind. He grabbed the connection to the mask, and he pulled. He did not pull with strength. He pulled with depression. He injected a massive dose of mundane, boring, grey reality into the colourful mind of the mask. The effect was instant. The hive tyrant screamed. It was not a roar of pain. It was a scream of boredom. The yellow suit flickered. It turned into a grey administrative robe. The bright green skin of the Tyranid turned beige. The hive tyrant looked at its claws. It looked at Valoris. It said, "I have a query regarding Form 40B. The voice was dry. It was monotonous. The mask was being suffocated by the aggressive mediocrity of the host's will. The comedy field collapsed. The ice on the floor turned back to metal. The anvils turned back to ceiling tiles. The Sisters of Silence pushed the debris off themselves. The bioship shook. The Toon-Nids outside the ship stopped dancing. They stopped laughing. They looked at each other. They were confused. The hive mind is a singular will. If the center of the will becomes depressed, the whole swarm becomes depressed. The Tyranid ships stopped firing party favors. They just floated there. They lost their motivation. They didn't want to eat anymore. Eating seemed like too much effort. Valoris saw the opening. He did not kill the tyrant. Killing it might release the mask to find a new host. He had to contain it. He ordered the sisters to surround the beige tyrant. They intensified their blank fields. They created a cage of nothingness. The tyrant sat down. It slumped its shoulders. It sighed. It looked like a man waiting at the DMV. It was neutralized. But the mask is an artifact of chaos. It does not accept containment for long. The energy began to build up. It could not express itself as comedy, so it began to express itself as madness. The beige color started to crack. Green light shone through. The mask was fighting Hecaton. It was trying to force him to be happy. It showed him visions of a galaxy made of candy. It tickled his soul. Hecaton screamed in the psychic void. He was weak. He was just a scribe. He could not hold back a god forever. He needed help. Valoris realized the situation. The strategic victory was temporary. The entity was breaking containment. If it escaped now, it would be angry. It would not be funny anymore. It would be a horror beyond comprehension. They needed to get the mask off the tyrant's face. But the mask was fused to the chitin. It was part of the bone. It could not be cut. Then a transmission broke through the vox. It was from the surface of terror. It was coming from the Imperial dungeon, from the golden throne itself. It was not a voice. The Emperor does not speak. It was a command code, a sequence of psychic triggers. It unlocked a vault deep within the palace. A weapon was deploying. It was not a gun. It was a person. A figure walked out of the shadows of the throne room. It was a solitaire, an harlequin of the Eldar. The harlequins are the servants of the laughing god, Segorak. They are the only ones who understand the logic of the joke. The solitaire had been a prisoner or a guest of the Emperor for centuries. Now he was released. The solitaire moved through the webway. He appeared on the bridge of the Tyranid ship. He did not fight the custodes. He did not fight the Tyranids. He danced, but his dance was not like the mask's dance. The mask's dance was chaotic and random. The solitaire's dance was a narrative. It was the dance of the end. He moved towards the slumped hive tyrant. He offered a hand. The tyrant looked up. The solitaire did not smile. He wore a mask of tragedy. He was mirroring the sadness of Hecatomb. He was validating the misery. The mask entity was confused. It feeds on reaction. It tries to get a laugh. If the audience is stone-faced, custodes, it tries harder. But if the audience is mirroring the tragedy, the joke falls flat. The solitaire was effectively heckling the god. He was telling the mask that his act was bad, that nobody was laughing, that it was awkward. This is the one thing a comedian fears, the bomb. The hive tyrant began to sweat. The green light dimmed. The confidence of the entity was shaken. Hecatomb felt the grip loosen. He pushed harder. "I am not having fun," he shouted in the mindscape. "This is stupid. I want to go home." The rejection was total. The mask cannot stay where it is not wanted. It requires a willing host to fully bond. Hecatomb revoked his consent. The wooden mask cracked. A fissure appeared down the center. Green smoke poured out. The hive tyrant convulsed. The yellow suit dissolved. The Tyranid beast shrieked as its biology tried to remember how to be a predator. It was a moment of absolute vulnerability. Valoris raised his axe. This was the massive outcome. A single scribe's refusal to smile had broken the invulnerability of a hive fleet. The Toon Force was deactivated. The Tyranids were just flesh and blood again, and flesh and blood can be killed. But the outcome was more dangerous than simple victory. The energy of the mask was released. It did not vanish. It shot upwards. It punched through the roof of the ship. It flew into space. It was a cloud of pure chaotic potential. It was looking for a new host. It looked at the fleets battling nearby. It looked at the custodes. It looked at the Grey Knights. It wanted someone powerful, someone who could make the whole galaxy laugh. The cloud moved towards terror. It moved towards the strongest psychic beacon in the galaxy. It moved towards the Astronomicon. The solitaire screamed a warning. If the mask bonded with the beacon, it would broadcast the signal of madness to every ship in the Imperium. Every navigator looking into the warp would see the joke. The entire human race would be driven insane in a single moment. The stakes had shifted. The physical war was won. The Tyranids were vulnerable. But the spiritual war was about to be lost. Valoris made a decision. He grabbed the teleport Homer on his belt. He signaled the phalanx. the star fort of the Imperial fists that had just arrived in orbit. He ordered a precision bombardment, not on the Tyranids, on the cloud. He ordered them to fire the vortex missiles, weapons that tear holes in reality. He hoped to banish the mask back to the warp. The missiles fired. They streaked down. They hit the green cloud. The explosion was silent. A black hole opened. It sucked in the light. It sucked in the green smoke. For a moment it seemed to work. The mask was gone. The Hive Tyrant lay dead, killed by the backlash. The Tyranid fleet, confused and leaderless, was being slaughtered by the vengeful Imperial Navy. The Battle of Sol was turning. Then the black hole burped. It was a small sound, but it echoed on every Vox channel. The black hole did not close. It turned into a mouth, a giant, black, cosmic mouth. It smiled. The mask had not been banished. It had worn the vortex. It had possessed the singularity itself. Now it was not a person. It was a hole in the universe, and it was hungry. It looked at the Tyranid fleet. It looked at the Imperial fleet. It decided that ships were boring. It wanted to play with planets. The mouth turned towards Mars, the red planet, the home of the Mechanicus. The mouth licked its lips. The Fabricator General on Mars calculated the survival probability. It was 0. The mask had evolved. It was no longer a biological infection. It was a celestial event. The small choice of a scribe saving his soul but dooming the system. Hecaton was free. He died as the Hive Tyrant's body failed. He died a man. He died miserable and alone. It was a good death. But his rejection had forced the mask to escalate. Now there was no host to reason with. There was only a cosmic entity of pure farce, and it was about to eat the Forge world. The unavoidable offer was clear. To stop a god of chaos, you cannot use order. You must use a greater chaos, or a sacrifice so funny that the god laughs himself to death. The universe held its breath. The final curtain was rising. The siege of the red planet began with the death of the moon Deimos. The celestial mouth, the avatar of the mask, did not simply consume the moon. It used a pair of giant chopsticks made of starlight to pick the moon out of its orbit. It dipped the moon into the atmosphere of Mars as if the planet were a bowl of soup. The gravitational tides tore the surface of the Forge world apart. Magma spilled from the crust, but it was not magma. It was custard. The breakdown of reality had reached the home of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The fabric of the material universe was being unraveled and knitted back together into a shape that defied all logic. The Fabricator General, Ud Odia Raskian, watched the destruction from his command spire. He was a creature of pure math. He had removed his emotions centuries ago, but now his logic cogitators were screaming. They could not process the data. The enemy was not attacking. The enemy was playing with its food. The orbital defense platforms of Mars are the most formidable in the galaxy. They are the ring of iron. Thousands of stations armed with lance batteries and torpedo silos. They opened fire on the vortex mouth. The energy beams struck the black hole. The mouth simply swallowed them. It gargled the plasma. Then it spat it back out. The spat plasma formed words in the void. The words were insults to the machine god. The stations began to change. The gun barrels curled backward. The metal plating turned into soft felt. The servitors manning the guns started to dance. The entire defense network was neutralized not by destruction but by whimsy. Raskian realized that the calculation was complete. The probability of victory was 0. The probability of Mars becoming a giant ball of yarn was 100%. Captain-General Trajann Valoris arrived on the teleporter deck of the Fabricator General Spire. He was accompanied by the Solitaire. The Harlequin was not dancing now. He was walking with a heavy, mournful step. They approached the giant machine body of Raskian. The room was shaking. The roof was turning into glass. Through the ceiling, they could see the giant eye of the vortex looking down at them. The eye was bloodshot and manic. It was looking for the most serious thing on the planet to torment. It was looking for the Noctis Labyrinth. The Solitaire spoke first. His voice was like the cracking of dry leaves. He said that the mask had ascended. It was no longer a spirit of mischief. It had become a god of unmaking. It could not be fought with weapons. It could not be fought with will. It could only be fought by something that was more stubborn than chaos. It needed to be fought by a fundamental constant of the universe. The Solitaire pointed to the floor. He pointed deep into the crust of Mars. He pointed to the prison of the Void Dragon. The legend of the Dragon of Mars is the darkest secret of the Mechanicus. They believe the machine god lies beneath the surface. The truth is far older and far more dangerous. The dragon is a Catan, a star god, a being of the material realm that enslaved whole galaxies before humanity even existed. It was defeated by the Emperor and imprisoned in the Noctis Labyrinth to dream of electric sheep. It is the master of physics. It is the master of machines. It does not understand the warp. It does not understand magic. And it absolutely does not understand jokes. Valoris looked at the Fabricator General. He understood the unavoidable offer. To save Mars from the Toon Force, they had to wake the dragon. They had to unleash a monster that could eat the sun to stop a monster that was turning the sun into a disco ball. It was a choice between two apocalypses. Raskin hesitated. To wake the dragon was forbidden. It was the ultimate tech heresy. But he looked at his screens. He saw the iron dunes of the Mare Erythrium turning into a giant slip and slide. He saw his Gitarai legions wearing oversized shoes. The dignity of the cult Mechanicus was being erased. If they died by the dragon, they died as machines. If they died by the mask, they died as punchlines. Raskian made his choice. He transmitted the binary sequence. The Omega Vault opened. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in a cavern the size of a continent, the restraints disengaged. The Tesseract prisons powered down. The ancient necrodermis sarcophagus hissed. The air in the cavern turned freezing cold. The dragon woke up. It did not wake up with a roar. It woke up with a realization. It felt the universe. It felt the atoms. And it felt something wrong. It felt the mask. The dragon is a being of absolute order and physical laws. The presence of the mask was like an itch inside its brain. It was an error in the code of reality. The dragon rose. It was a cloud of silver light that solidified into a shape of impossible geometry. It phased through the rock. It flew upwards. On the surface, the ground exploded, not with fire but with silence. A pillar of silver light shot into the sky. It pierced the custard clouds. It struck the vortex mouth. The mask entity recoiled. It felt pain, not physical pain, but the pain of rejection. The silver light was not energy. It was a command. The command was be real. The mask tried to warp the beam. It tried to turn the silver light into a stream of water, but the light refused. The Catan are the masters of the material. Their will overrides the warp in the physical plane. The water turned back into hard, cold radiation. The vortex mouth snarled. It shifted its focus from the planet to the new challenger. The mask loves a challenge. It dissolved the black hole form and coalesced into a giant avatar. It became a figure the size of a titan. It looked like a caricature of the Emperor, but wearing a jester's motley. It wielded a hammer that squeaked. It swung the hammer at the silver light. The dragon formed a hand of liquid metal. It caught the hammer. The hammer did not squeak. It shattered. The physics of the hammer were instantly rewritten by the dragon. The rubber became steel, and the steel shattered under the impact. The battle of gods began over the Tharsis highlands. It was a war of concepts. The mask tried to impose narrative logic. It tried to drop a safe on the dragon. A safe the size of a mountain appeared in the sky. It fell. The dragon looked at the safe. It analyzed the atomic structure. It dismantled the safe into its constituent atoms before it hit. The atoms rained down as harmless dust. The mask tried to paint a tunnel on the fabric of space to escape the dragon's grasp. The dragon reached into the painting and pulled the mask out. The dragon did not care about the fourth wall. The dragon owns the wall. The solitaire watched with a grim satisfaction. This was the gambit. The mask relies on the victim playing along. Even if the victim fights, they are participating in the scene. But the dragon did not participate. The dragon simply deleted the scene. The mask tried to use Toon physics to stretch its body away from a strike. The dragon manipulated the gravitational constant of the local area. It increased gravity by a factor of 1 billion. The mask's elastic body snapped. It was pulled down to the surface of Mars. It hit the ground with the force of an extinction event. The impact cleared the custard and the confetti. It exposed the red rock. The mask lay in a crater. It looked up. It was confused. It was scared. The dragon descended. It did not look like a warrior. It looked like a storm of silver needles. It hovered over the mask. It began to feed. The C'tan eat stars. They eat energy. The mask was a dense knot of warp energy and belief. To the dragon, it was a delicious meal. The dragon extended tendrils of necrodermis. They stabbed into the mask's avatar. They began to siphon the green light. The mask screamed. It was a sound that shattered the windows of every spire on Mars. It was the sound of the fun dying. The mask realized it could not win. It was fighting a rock. You cannot tell a joke to a rock. The mask needed to escape. It looked for a host. It looked for a way out. It saw the Imperial fleet holding position near the moon of Phobos. It saw the souls on board. It prepared to jump. It prepared to abandon its physical form and possess the fleet. If it did that, it would spread across the galaxy instantly. Valoris saw the energy build up. He knew what was happening. The dragon was winning the physical fight, but it didn't understand the warp. It didn't understand that the mask could flee into the soul sea. They needed to trap it. They needed a container. The solitaire stepped forward. He held up a small object. It was a single, perfect gemstone, a spirit stone of the Elder, but it was black. It was a waystone to the Black Library. Now, the solitaire whispered, the punchline. The solitaire began to laugh, but it was not his laughter. He channeled the laughter of his god, Shegorak, the laughing god of the Harlequins. The laughter echoed across the void. It caught the attention of the mask. The mask looked to the solitaire. It felt a kinship. It felt a challenge. The dragon was boring. The dragon was pain. But the solitaire was offering a finale. The mask hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, the trap was sprung, but not by the Elder. A green portal opened on the hull of the Ark Speranza. A figure stepped out. It was Trazyn the Infinite, the necron overlord of Solemnes, the galactic collector. He had been waiting for this moment. He held a device in his hand. It was not a weapon. It was a tesseract labyrinth of the highest grade. It was a prison made of multi-dimensional geometry. Trazyn aimed the device. He did not aim it at the avatar. He aimed it at the source. He aimed it at the wooden mask that was floating in the center of the green energy. A unique specimen, Trazyn remarked. The embodiment of the illogical. A fine addition to the surrealist wing. He activated the device. The tesseract flared. A beam of dimensional displacement hit the wooden mask. The masked entity tried to resist. It grabbed onto reality. It grabbed onto the dragon. But the dragon was already pushing it away. The dragon wanted the parasite gone. The dragon added its own will to the banishment. It pushed. Trazyn pulled. The solitaire guided the flow. The trifecta of power was absolute. The wooden mask was ripped from the avatar. The green energy collapsed. The avatar dissolved into smoke. The mask flew across the void. It shrank. It spun. It was sucked into the small metal box in Trazyn's hand. Trazyn caught the box. The green light faded. The box clicked shut. Silence returned to the Sol system. The confetti on Mars turned to ash. The custard turned back to lava and cooled into rock. The giant smile on the sun faded. The music stopped. The war was over. But the unavoidable offer has a cost. The dragon was awake. It hovered over Mars. It had tasted the power of a god. It was hungry. It looked at the tesseract in Trazyn's hand. It wanted the dessert. Trazyn looked at the star god. He felt a rare emotion. Fear. He bowed stiffly. My apologies, Ancient One. This is property of the Nihilak dynasty. Trazyn stepped back into his portal and vanished. He took the madness with him. He took the only thing that could challenge the dragon. Now the dragon looked at the Imperium. It looked at the Fabricator General. Raskian fell to his many knees. He chanted the binary of submission. The dragon did not care for prayers. It cared for function. It looked at the damage done to Mars. It saw the inefficiency. It decided to fix it. It sent a pulse of command through the planet. Every machine on Mars stopped. Every servitor froze. Then they restarted. But they were not running on Imperial dogma anymore. They were running on Citan logic. The efficiency increased by 4,000%. The factories began to churn out weapons of perfect design. But the tech priests were locked out of the controls. They were passengers in their own bodies. The dragon had enslaved the machine spirit of the entire planet. Valoris watched from the spire. He had saved the Imperium from becoming a joke, but he had handed the forge of humanity to a monster. He looked at the solitaire. The Harlequin was gone. He had played his part. He had ensured that chaos did not win, even if the Imperium did not exactly win either. Valoris opened a channel to the Golden Throne. He requested orders. The response was silence. The Emperor offered no solution. The problem of the dragon was a problem for tomorrow. Today, they had survived. The fallout was immediate. The Tyranid fleet, severed from the mask's power, had reverted to instinctive behavior. But they were deep in the Sol system. The Imperial Navy, humiliated but alive, fell upon them with a fury born of shame. They slaughtered the bioships. They burned the splinters. There was no mercy. Every captain who had been forced to dance, every soldier who had been turned into a cartoon, poured their hatred into the trigger. The Tyranids were annihilated. The biomass was burned. The Sol system was cleansed of the alien. However, the scars remained. The crew of the Divine Right still had nightmares of the laughter. The Grey Knights on Titan had to undergo mass mind wipes to remove the memory of their bouncy castle fortress. The psychological damage to the human race was profound. They had seen that their reality was fragile. They had seen that their grim darkness could be mocked. The fear of the dark was replaced by a fear of the absurd. On Mars, the situation stabilized into a cold detention. The dragon did not destroy the Imperium. It seemed content to rule its labyrinth and optimize the planet. The Mechanicus became its jailers and its servants. They provided it with energy, and it provided them with technology. It was a deal with the devil, but the Imperium runs on deals with devils. The new Mars produced ships that were faster and guns that were stronger. But every bolt shell had a faint silver glow, and every tech priest had a cold, empty light in their eyes. In the depths of Solemnace, Trazyn placed the Tesseract on a pedestal. It sat between a Thunder Warrior and the Enslaver. He looked at the box. Inside, he could see the mask. It was motionless. But sometimes, when the lights in the gallery were low, Trazyn could hear a faint sound coming from the box. It was not screaming. It was not laughter. It was tapping. A rhythmic tapping, like someone testing a microphone. Is this thing on? Trazyn reinforced the containment fields. He knew that some things are not meant to be collected, but he kept it anyway, because in a galaxy of endless war, sometimes you need a little entertainment. The timeline had shifted. The mask was gone, but it had broken the stagnation. The Tyranids were evolving to resist reality manipulation. The necrons were awake and wary of the Toon virus. The Imperium was armed with forbidden C'tan tech, and somewhere in the warp, the Chaos Gods were changing. They had learned fear. They realized that there were powers older and stranger than them. The great game continued, but the rules had been rewritten. The laughter had ended, but the smile remained, carved into the history of the 41st millennium like a scar. The chronicle of the Saturday morning apocalypse was closed. The era of the Silver Dragon had begun. The recording of the events known as the Saturnal Madness was purged from the Imperial archives 7 years after the siege of Mars. The Inquisition declared the very concept of the conflict to be a moral hazard. To know that the universe could be turned into a farce was to doubt the sanctity of the Emperor's suffering. Therefore, the history was erased. The veterans of the Sol System defense were quarantined in silence camps on the moon of Iapetus. They were forbidden from speaking. They were forbidden from smiling. The commissariat executed any soldier who laughed during a briefing. Laughter became a sign of corruption and a symptom of the green curse that had nearly undone reality. The Imperium returned to its grim darkness, but it was a forced darkness. It was a darkness held together by fear of the light. On Mars, the efficiency of production reached levels never seen since the dark age of technology. The dragon directed the forges with a cold and silent will. There were no more rituals. There was no more burning of incense or chanting of hymns. There was only output. The tech priests moved with fluid grace, and their cybernetics glowed with a pale silver light. They did not pray to the machine god anymore, because they received instructions directly from the network. The weapons they built were perfect, but they lacked the artisan's soul. The new cruisers of the Imperial Navy were sleek and predatory, but their machine spirits were predatory too. They did not protect their crews because they viewed them as fuel components. The Imperium had traded a chaotic madness for a tyrannical order, and in its desperation it called this victory. Deep in the eastern fringe, the Tyranid hive mind evolved. The splinter fleets that survived the purge did not forget the mask. They digested the experience. They learned that biomass was not the only resource. They learned that psychological warfare was as potent as acid. New bioforms began to appear in the ghoul stars, creatures that did not roar but mimicked the cries of human children, creatures that could project hallucinations of safety before they struck. The swarm had lost its sense of humor, but it had gained a sense of irony. The mask had taught the predator how to play with its prey, and the galaxy would bleed for that lesson. In the stasis galleries of Solemnace Trazyn, the Infinite stood before his newest display. The lighting was low. The wooden mask sat inside its tesseract prison, suspended in a field of absolute time. It was an unassuming object. It looked like a primitive carving that was crude and lifeless. Yet Trazyn observed a strange phenomenon. The dust in the display case did not settle. It swirled. It formed shapes, tiny microscopic shapes of balloons and hammers. The entity was not dead. It was merely waiting for the audience to return. Trazyn turned away, and his metal fingers tapped a silent rhythm on his staff. He knew the truth of history. Nothing ever truly ends. The curtain falls and the lights go out, but the actors remain in the dark waiting for the cue. The file closed. The date was recorded. The galaxy spun on, wounded and serious and terrified of the punchline that might one day return.